Hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm sorry that we're a little bit late, and I especially want to apologize to my very dear friend, the world-renowned scholar, Gidi Grinstein of the Reut Institute. It used to be so easy to stream live from Zoom to Facebook. It was really easy, and then it became impossible. And now we've tried to contact Zoom several times to the customer support to find out why this is happening. They told us that many people are complaining, so we have to find all these really strange workarounds. But at least we're live now, both on Instagram and on Facebook, and what an honor and what a pleasure for me to host my very dear friend, Gidi Grinstein. We're practically neighbors. And Gidi is not just one of the Jewish people's greatest scholars about the Middle East and about the modern state of Israel, and indeed the modern state of the Jewish people, but he's also just a gentleman. And he's been a critical part of the minyan that meets regularly for me to say Kaddish, to say the Jewish mourner's prayer for my father several times a week. And Gidi, I can't thank you enough for your friendship. But you've those of us who come to the minyan and you're a part of it, it's like a treat, because you're so smart and so insightful, and you have such an iconoclastic mind. It's remarkable how you think outside the box. So I wanted our audience to have the pleasure of hearing all the things that we get to hear in just everyday banter at the minyan. So welcome, Gidi, and thank you for coming on. And I'm sorry you had to wait. God bless you.
Rabbi, first of all, thank you very much for having me. And it's really an honor and a pleasure to be here. I've heard so much about this forum. And also, it's been very special to be with you during this year. It's been astonishing that you've been able to do this minyan every single day for almost, I think, 11 months. And it's almost coming to, the year is coming to an end, April 15, on Israel's Independence Day. And it's been a remarkable journey for you, but also for me as a participant. So thank you for allowing me this opportunity.
You know, in as much, Gidi, that in as much as everything is divine providence and nothing happens by accident, I actually want to begin this conversation by alighting on a comment that you just made, which is, I'm sorry you had to wait. I hate, in Jewish law, stealing someone's time and making them wait is a form of theft, because your time is very valuable.
That's absolutely no problem. It's okay.
No, but I should explain, beyond some of the technical difficulties, which have been a little bit ongoing, we have fixed them through workarounds. Really, Zoom should help us with live streaming to Facebook. We recently, 2 weeks ago, we had Steve Harvey live. It was fantastic. 1 week ago, we had Secretary of State Mike Pompeo live for a full hour, or whatever it was, 40 minutes, and that was broadcast live. And now you, thank God. But I just wanted to say, one of the reasons that I was a bit late tonight, actually, believe it or not, has to do with what you just said. My father's last Kaddish, so the way it works is there's 12 months of mourning for a parent, and you say Kaddish for 11 months. Now, why not the full 12? Because 12 months that the soul is in Gehenna, in the Gehinnom, and being cleansed in this not so pleasant place of iniquity, of sin, we don't want to say that the deceased is so filled with sin that they have to stay a full 12 months. So we shave a month off, and everybody only keeps 11 months. So you keep 11 months, you keep 12 months minus 1 month and 1 day. So that means if my father passed away, as he did on the 4th, if my father was buried on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem on the 4th day of Sivan last year, so my last day of Kaddish is the 3rd day of Iyar this year, in the year 5,781 since creation. Now, here's what's interesting. Every year, Yom Ha'atzmaut is on the 5th day of Iyar. That's when Yom Ha'atzmaut is. Israel was declared a state on the 5th day of Iyar, just after Passover in 1948. This year, because Yom Ha'atzmaut falls out on a Saturday on Shabbat, the government moved it forward 2 days so that people are not mechalel Shabbat, so that you don't have to choose between observing the Sabbath and doing Yom Ha'atzmaut celebrations. So suddenly, my father's last Kaddish is on Yom Ha'atzmaut. Because of that, we did the Torah, the final letters of the Torah for Yom Ha'atzmaut. And one of the reasons that I shouldn't even say this, but one of the reasons that I was a little bit late tonight, the Sofer, the guy who helped write it and the guy who's in charge of it, who's a good friend, he's a very decent man, he told me that he will not complete the Torah on Yom Ha'atzmaut because it's Israel's Independence Day. And, as a Orthodox Jew, he doesn't necessarily agree with Israel and its secular nature, and he would be endorsing it if he came on that day. And I said to myself, am I in the freaking twilight zone? Am I in the twilight zone that a religious man is telling me that he will complete a Torah that we paid for on any day of the year for my father, within reason, but not on Israel's Independence Day? And Gidi, it allows us to begin this conversation by just speaking about the terrible divide between the Jewish people. The Jewish people are ripped asunder, secular, religious. Israel's about to have its fourth election in whatever it is, 3 or 4 years. You'll talk more to that. But I can't stand these divisions. And Israel should be the one thing that unites us all, secular, religious, right, left, traditional, and Masorti. Instead, that's what I was dealing with tonight, believe it or not.
So actually, I think that you're touching on something that I believe is very profound about our culture. And that is the way in which we balance unity, adversity, and diversity. And our society actually has very powerful forces that drive people apart. We actually, as a people, instituted the notion that two diametrically opposed views can be the words of God, can actually be true, which is a phenomenal notion that came about 2,200 years ago. And then, so we have these incentives in our society that are actually incentivizing debate and incentivizing dissent. But at the same time, we have tremendous forces of unity in our society that keep our people together. We have founding narratives that are very powerful. We have the law of matrilineal descent that I hold to be actually an amazingly powerful force of unity, because it establishes that I'm talking about the fact that the child of a Jewish mother is a Jew by the fact that the mother is Jewish. So obviously some people think that it also applies to the father and so on. But what I'm saying is that when you have a technical law of membership in the society, that actually means that you cannot exclude me and I cannot exclude you. You can be a communist and I can be a capitalist. You can be a Zionist and I can be an anti-Zionist. Nobody can exclude the other. So actually we have very strong forces of unity. Our society balances unity, adversity, and diversity. And this is why in history, I believe, the Jewish people has optimized the pace of adaptation. We don't adapt too fast. We don't adapt too slow. So actually, as a Zionist, I deeply respect the place of anti-Zionist voices and forces in the Jewish world. I actually think it's healthy that Zionism is being challenged ideologically from within the Jewish people. I think it's good for Israel. It's good for the Jewish people. And here's the irony. The state of Israel was opposed by Haredi groups, anti-Zionist group. But today, Israel is probably the most remarkable platform in history for ultra-Orthodox Jewish life. And I love that about Israel.
You know, this is what I love about you. What you love about Israel, we all love about Israel. But what I love about you is that only you could have explained that kind of dissent about Yom Ha'atzmaut in such gracious, favorable terms. So, you know, God bless you. But I could easily say, Gidi, that one of the things, this is really weird, because like the guy with the yarmulke and the beard is saying, how the heck can you attack Yom Ha'atzmaut? And the world-renowned, more secular scholar, you are saying, no, it's good that we have this kind of dissent. So a bit of a role reversal, that's fine. But I could easily say that one of the reasons that, I hate the word chiloni. Chiloni means chulin, you know, like plain, that secular Israelis are called like plain Jews, and every Jew is special. But let's just call non-traditional, non-Orthodox Jews, non-religious Jews in Israel. They get upset at the Haredim because they feel, you know, it's one thing if you don't want to do everything that we do, going to the army, etc. But when you kind of dump on the state, if you don't appreciate that these guys are prepared to fight and chas v'shalom, die so that you can study Gemara, Halacha, so you can pray with a minyan 3 times a day, that you have to at least have a karata tov. If you have to at least just don't dump on the state. You're not going to participate. You're not going to go to the army. Okay. But to criticize and condemn the state, I don't know. How do you feel?
No, I think we have to take a broad view of this whole situation and also separate the political and the politicians from the general people. As you know, Shmuley, I married into an ultra-Orthodox family. I am what they call in Israel chiloni. I really respect the fact that you reject the notion that there is chiloni in the Jewish people, but I'm not a person of faith, although I come to your minyan and so on. But my family is ultra-Orthodox. It's Haredim. And here is what I see, which is very interesting. In my terms, today, most of them are Zionists. And here is what I mean by that. They care about the state of Israel. They want its success. They're interested in its security and long-term prosperity. and they are full participants in modern Israeli society. The fact that they have not signed into the so-called Zionist movement, that's a formality in my view. If my brothers-in-law and sisters-in-law work in the government, they contribute to society, they care about society, they are today part of the Zionist project. And in many ways, one of the biggest success of modern Zionism today is the way it is co-opting slowly even the ultra-Orthodox people. And by the way, I may say also on the other side, we're seeing an amazing phenomena of Arab Israelis that are effectively embracing the fundamental ideas of Zionism, which means they accept and respect and even support the right of the Jewish people to self-determination. And also, I think all of us, you, everybody here on the call, should appreciate that for a very long time, until recently, Zionism was not the majority movement in the Jewish people. Most Jews were not Zionists. They were ultra-Orthodox, they were Bundists, they were socialists, there were a lot of things, but they were not Zionists. It's only in recent years that Zionism is the dominant political movement and ideology in the Jewish people. But I think it would be actually bad for the Jewish people if Zionism would be the only ideology that we have as Jews. So as a Zionist, I like that. As a Jew, I actually appreciate the fact that there are contesting voices.
Okay, I partially agree with you. You and I have had some, this is one of the reasons I'm so happy that we're talking about this to my community. I want people to hear the kind of conversations that we're fortunate to have one-on-one, and now we're sharing it with a much wider audience. We've had this conversation many times about whether there should be a diaspora. You and I agree there should be a diaspora. You and I, and please, you know, soon when you can qualify anything, I'm not your spokesperson, obviously, Gidi. I want you to represent your views with a way that you're comfortable. But you and I believe in a diaspora. You and I believe that when Prime Minister Netanyahu and Natan Sharansky, you know, I consider them two great heroes of the Jewish people, but when they both said after the Charlie Hebdo massacre, when was it, 2012? I can't remember that horrible massacre in France, maybe it was more recent, that, you know, all the Jews should move to Israel. We disagreed. I disagreed. I think we need a strong diaspora. I think how else is Israel going to get support for foreign support? It doesn't have strong Jewish communities in Paris and in Washington and in Los Angeles and in London and you know, in Canberra and Sydney, Australia. I could go on, Brussels. So that's one thing. I mean, just from a very practical point, Israel needs support. But I also believe that Judaism is a universal religion. We're not just a religion that is isolated to one geographic location. We're a truly global religion. And we're not even like Islam, which is a global religion, but is still dominant in Arab or Middle Eastern countries. Of course, it's very large. You know, India has the second largest Muslim population in the world, et cetera. But by and large, Islam dominates, you know, specifically the Middle East. Judaism wasn't necessarily like that. Judaism is a universal religion, the way Christianity, which is the offspring of Judaism, is. So for all those reasons, I believe, and more, I believe we need a strong diaspora. But what I'm saying is something a little bit different, that even if we have a strong diaspora and Jews who are Zionists and non-Zionists, and there's different political ideologies, religious ideologies, and the more the merrier insofar as we all believe that we should not be monoliths, there still has to be one cohesiveness about who is a Jew, what is Jewish nationhood, what is Jewish identity. And Israel has got to be something we all agree on that we need in Israel. So even like the Haredim, they could say all they want that we don't need an Israel and we can wait till Mashiach comes. The problem is the Holocaust really undermines that, because there were so many fine Haredi Jews. It's an understatement. Millions who were murdered by the Nazis. They had nowhere to go. They had no army to defend them. And the Holocaust refuted, in my opinion, the non-Zionist ideology. Let me just qualify with one last thing and then ask you to please respond. I'm a Chabad Chassid. You could see it and you could see the pictures of the Rebbe behind me. I'm a Chabad Chassid. And the Rebbe's ideology was a universal Judaism, open centers all over the world. You're well aware of the fact that Chabad has done this better than anyone. Chabad is everywhere. Chabad is in Anguilla, Chabad is in Thailand, Chabad is in everywhere. Israel is, no, Jews shouldn't be everywhere. Jews should be in Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Beersheba, and Yudan Shomron. How do the two reconcile? Well, you know, the Rebbe's ideology was about a universal globalist Judaism. But Herzl's ideology was, even that universal globalist Judaism has to have an anchor. It has to have a home whence it stems, and that home is Israel. So I don't see the two being in conflict. I think the two are necessary. Two political, maybe even religious ideologies that could have seemed to have been in conflict, but I think are actually very much complementary.
I agree with you. I agree with you for a couple of reasons. First of all, we have to remember that fundamentally, the mission of Zionism was to serve the continued significant existence of the Jewish people. This is the mission of Zionism. Israel, a national home for the Jewish people, is the tool, is the platform. But the mission is to serve the continued significant existence of the Jewish people. So I believe that whoever is a serious Zionist should ask himself or herself, what is required to serve the continued significant existence of the Jewish people? And here is, I think, one fundamental truth about the Jewish people. And that is that Israel may be powerful and strong, but the World Wide Web of Jewish communities is resilient. And if we look at Jewish history, we see that there has been 2,600 years of continuous significant existence of the World Wide Web of Jewish communities, including in the diaspora. Meanwhile, the Jewish people has only been able to keep maybe 300 years, 400 years of effective sovereignty in the land of Israel. So I think that generally speaking, the Jewish people has been much better at sustaining Jewish life outside of the land of Israel than in the land of Israel. This is the first point. The second point is, if we're really honest to ourselves, the last 4 prime ministers of Israel are pointing to an existential threat to the state of Israel, which comes from Iran. So if there is one major Jewish community in the world that may be subject to an existential threat, and was subject to an existential threat in 1967, is in the land of Israel. So from the perspective of the Jewish people, we should not put all our eggs in one geographic and cultural basket. So if you're thinking about the national security, if we can speak like that, of the Jewish people, definitely not all Jews should be in the land of Israel. The third thing is that Israel is much stronger and more robust because of the Jewish world. Diplomatically, if you think about who's fighting the fight of Israel, let's say in any country around the world, it is most often much more the local Jewish community than the Israeli diplomats in the embassy. If you think about who's opening markets for Israel around the world, in most cases, it would be local Jews much more than the economic attaché or the trade attaché in the Israeli embassy. So Israel is actually, I would say, inflated and multiplied by the global presence of the Jewish people. And the truth of the matter is, it was never better to be Jewish. And the reason it was never better to be Jewish is because than today. Because of the unprecedented economic prosperity and power of Israel, diplomatic and military power of Israel, diplomatic influence and military power, and because effectively there are no oppressed Jews today, maybe except Iran, 30,000 people in Iran. All Jewish communities around the world are prosperous and free. And that is unprecedented in history. I actually think it's a new era in Jewish history, but that's a whole different conversation.
Well, that's one of the things I wanted to talk about. I'll just go back for a second. I guess there's a number of ways to view Israel. One is the eternal ancient Jewish homeland where the Jewish people were birthed and where our history is. That's, undisputable because it's where Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Micah, 80% of the biblical events take place in not only in Israel, but Yudan Shomron. So that's one way to look at Israel. Second way to look at Israel is, that's important, but it became much more relevant post-Holocaust. That after the annihilation of the Jewish people in Europe, had there been a Jewish state, the Holocaust probably would be inconceivable. I don't think there would have been a Holocaust had there been in Israel. We would have had an army, would have had a place where Jews could go, etc. Hitler's policy initially, of course, was one of expulsion. It turned to annihilation, really, from historians debate 1940, 1941, but 1933 he wanted the Jews to leave. No one would take them. And then the third way you could look at Israel is not just a place of history and not just a place which is a refuge from the Holocaust and annihilation and genocide, but rather as a place that confers dignity on all Jews around the world because of its stunning achievements. Everyone's so amazed Israel's vaccines and technological superpower and military know-how, etc. Those are three. The fourth, of course, is that it's the epicenter of the Jewish religion. You just said that never in history have even the Haredim flourished and the yeshivot flourished like never before. But you're mentioning, Gidi, that on the post-Holocaust front, not only is Israel not a secure place, it could be a more dangerous place because Iran calls Israel a one-bomb state. And I would argue, I don't know if I'm ready to concede that point yet, because even, God forbid, if Iran tried to develop a nuclear weapon, which I think they are trying to develop, they're a terror-funding, murderous regime, a very bloody regime. But Israel still has an incredible air force to stop them, incredible missiles to stop them, incredible technology that we're probably even not aware of.
I agree with you, but Shmuley, I didn't say that was my opinion. This is Israeli prime ministers who framed Israel as being subjected to an emerging existential threat. It's not me. It's
Right.
Prime Minister Netanyahu, it's Prime Minister Olmert, it's Prime Minister Sharon, it's even Prime Minister Barak. They said it. And two of them, without naming names, two of them even used 1938, 1933 kind of metaphors to explain Israel's situation.
Sure. Even Mike Pence. What? Mike Pence. I was in Warsaw.
I reject that. I think that for a prime minister of Israel to speak in these terms is almost defying Zionist logic. But what I'm saying is, all I'm saying is that if, as a Zionist, you subscribe to the notion that the purpose of the state of Israel is to serve the significant and to sustain the significant existence of the Jewish people, then we should not even quest to concentrate all Jews in one place. But there's also another reason, another totally different aspect to this question. It's not just about security. It's about the diversity of ways of life. If you look at Jewish history, part of the reason why Jews survived and repeatedly thrived and always made a contribution to humanity is because we incorporated multiple ways of living among our different communities. And Israel is just one ecosystem, one political, economic, geographic ecosystem. And I believe that the diversity of communities around the world is essential. And by the way, I really believe that the Rebbe saw it. And that's why the Rebbe accepted the Jewish diversity in its fullest sense. The way I experience Chabad is that Chabad accepts Jews as basically as they are, obviously opening the way, opening the door to Jewish life. But there is no pressure to actually, there's only invitation to actually join. And people can be part of the Chabad experience without living the Chabad way of life. And I think this is a very profound element of the Chabad movement as I experience it. Shmuley, as you know, wherever I go, I check on Chabad around the world. So I'm a big fan.
As am I, and I'm a member. I was going to say a card-carrying member. They don't give you any card in a Chabad, but I am too. But the Rebbe loved Israel. Let's shift the focus to this. Let's shift this discussion about Jewish identity to make it a bit more Israel focused for a moment, because yes, the Rebbe achieved unprecedented things. Chabad is a miracle. One has to ask, however, whether it would be possible without Israel. Could you have a global religion with all these centers like Buddhism, or if it didn't have an epicenter to give the Jews great pride? Notice that the Rebbe launched his entire mitzvah campaign for Chabad specifically after the 1967 Six-Day War, when Israel electrified the world. The Rebbe was electrified. And notice that the Rebbe started using a lot of military imagery for the Chabad mitzvah campaign. We call them mitzvah tanks. That comes really from 1967 and Israel's tank rush across the Sinai to Egypt and capture. And the Rebbe, as you know, Gidi, was very opposed to giving back land and trading land for peace. He was vociferously opposed. I remember I was present live hearing his talks about this, and I've written, a great deal about it. But I guess what I'm saying is that you can have a global religion like Judaism, and one that is reinforced by Chabad centers worldwide, but without Israel, there's really something missing.
Of
Israel,
course, the Jews are deflated.
But let me just make it more into a question. Here's the question. You rightly say that we have to have diversity among Jewish opinion. I'm with you. Reform Jews, Reconstructionist Jews, Orthodox Jews, ultra-Orthodox Jews, atheist Jews, agnostic Jews. We're all Jews. And we have to have diversity. But there are lines one crosses where we kind of say this person is no longer, that they've written, not that they're no longer a Jew, but they've written themselves out of the Jewish community, maybe permanently, God forbid. Take, for example, a Jew who converts to Christianity and a Jew who believes in Jesus. Now, I have opened many dialogue with Jews for Jesus, Messianic Jews. I've debated them. We've had thousands of people at debates, a lot of them on the Upper West Side at the Ethical Cultural Center. But a lot of people have condemned me for it, saying, sorry, this is the line. You believe in Jesus? Okay, you were born to a Jewish mother, matrilineal descent. Doesn't matter anymore because because belief in Jesus has no place in normative Judaism, even amidst this. And I'm kind of wondering, that we can leave to another discussion, theological discussion. But I'm kind of wondering, does it apply to people who hate Israel and believe that Israel should not exist as a state? Let's say you have Jews who believe, look, I'm not,
leaders of the BDS movement.
Yeah, one Jew is not a Zionist and says, look, I'm not into Israel. I'm not into it. It's not my thing. I'm an American Jew. I'm an Australian Jew. I'm a Belgian Jew. I'm not into it. But another Jew comes along and says Israel is a stain on Jewish history. Israel is a stain on Jewish identity. Israel is a corrupt, God forbid. Has that person written themselves out of the Jewish community insofar as the centrality of Israel has become so important to Jewish identity?
So I think there is a big difference between writing yourself out of the Jewish community and writing yourself out of the Jewish people. There's a big difference. And also, Shmuley, in a lot of what you said, you reflect the notion that the formative idea of Judaism is religion. You kept saying Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, observant, not observant, Christian, embracing Jesus or not Jesus, and so on. In my view, the formative story of Judaism is peoplehood. And the story of peoplehood is a story about a shared destiny and a shared legacy. It's a story about family. It's a story about mutual responsibility. And when you look at the formative stories of our people, they're a story about a family. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the tribes, the family. It's a story about family. And it's very, very difficult to leave a family. If you are my brother and you tell me, hey, I hate you, you're no longer my brother. You can tell me until tomorrow, until you're blue in your face, that you're no longer my brother, but you're still my brother. So in this sense, by the way, I distinguish between leaving the Jewish community and leaving the Jewish people. I think that it's our people, and I'm not saying religion, our people has made it extremely difficult to leave the Jewish people. You could say you're a Christian, you're still a Jew from the perspective of Jews, right? And along the matrilineal line, you will remain, a person can remain Jewish for generations, even if they didn't do a single thing that is Jewish. And I think that this is really, to me, this is the way to understand Judaism, the fundamental way. We are a people, before we're a religion. And in fact, almost throughout our history, without exception, there was only a fraction of Jews that were fully observant or significantly observant. Most Jews were not observant. We're now reading in the Parshot of the Torah. People build a golden calf. They're a part of a people. So what I'm saying is that also when it comes to the state of Israel, the view of the state of Israel as serving the Jewish people as opposed to serving the Israelis is fundamental to the identity of Israel. To me, you can be anti-Zionist, you're still part of the Jewish people. You can be a member of the BDS movement, anti-Israel, you're still part of the Jewish people. But we have to acknowledge one thing. In our history, there is a phenomena of people who are anti-Jewish Jews. So they are anti-Jewish, but they're still Jews. They were in the Judenrats during the Holocaust. They are now leaders, some of them are leaders of the anti-Israel delegitimization movement. We know that these people collaborated with the Inquisition. And as we go back in history, the person that told on Moses to Pharaoh was a Jew, was a Hebrew man, right? We know that an Egyptian hit a Hebrew man. Moses saw it. He looked around. There was nobody around. He killed the Egyptian. He buried him. And still he has to run away. That means that someone gave him in, and that was a fellow Jew. So we see this phenomenon throughout history. There are anti-Jewish Jews, and this is just, well, I believe it's almost an inevitable dynamics of our people to produce these people. But they're still, from the perspective of peoplehood, they're Jews, in my view.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I think that was very eloquently stated, that we are a family and a people before we are even a religion. Notice that there are atheist Jews, non-practicing Jews. I agree with you, and that was very eloquently stated. But it does bring us to a controversy going on in Israel right now. So let me just, before I bring it up, let me just establish what we've said so far, just so everyone's clear. We've said that you can believe in nothing, you're a Jew. If you're born to a Jewish mother, you said matrilineal descent, you can hate Israel. You can be part of BDS, you're still a Jew. You can be an anti-Jewish Jew, as you said, but you're a Jew. There's no disagreement with us on that. But all of that is, interestingly, Gidi, a halachic Jewish law definition of who is a Jew. Now, Israel is now raising this question of who is a Jew, because you're either a Jew if you were born to a Jewish mother, matrilineal descent, or you're a Jew if you converted. The question is, converted how? And that becomes a religious question. So on the one hand, we say you're Jewish even without any kind of faith, because Jews don't have to be theists. They don't have to have faith in God or faith in the Torah to be Jewish. On the other hand, if you're going to convert, there has to be some kind of standard. So let's take the United States, for example. What makes me an American? What makes me an American is either my wife is an American, but she wasn't born in the United States. My wife was born in Australia. She's a naturalized citizen. But to be a naturalized citizen, there were certain criteria. She had to know the basics of American history. She was tested on American history. She had to go and be asked all these questions. Yes, it helped that she was married to an American citizen, but even then, citizenship is not automatic. You have to know American history. There's basic criteria for becoming a naturalized citizen. I didn't have to know anything because I was born in Los Angeles, and I was born to an American mother and American parents. So I'm an American. Okay. So the criteria of entry through conversion is understandably higher, even for a national identity, like becoming an American citizen. But the same thing is true with the Jewish people. So do you agree that there has to be some kind of giyur k'halacha, that you can't just have conversion, that conversion has to have some kind of standard?
Yes, of course. But I also think that this standard has been and should be the subject of debate among the leaders of our communities. And the problem of Israel is that this standard was subjected to the power of a political body called the Central Rabbinate, which has the power of law to enforce its views. And I believe that this is an unhealthy situation for the Jewish people. I believe that the Jewish people evolves through the intellectual, spiritual competition among diverse centers of leadership. So different rabbis, if you wish, or other leaders of the community, they come up with their own interpretation, which is relevant to their place and to the time. And that competition among these alternative centers of leadership is what drives the Jewish people forward over time. What happened in Israel is that this competition was subjected to the hands of a body, a political body that is known to be horribly corrupt and is empowered by law to stifle this extremely healthy debate among religious and spiritual leaders of our community. And that's the problem in Israel. The problem in Israel is that matters of religiosity have been subjected to politics. And here is a great paradox in Israel. In Pesach, as you know, there is a law in Israel that you cannot sell chametz. And there are a lot of people that reject this and are upset about this, and they would eat chametz in public, and they would sell chametz in public, and it's always an issue of contention. But interestingly enough, there is no law that forbids you from driving on Yom Kippur. And nobody drives on Yom Kippur. And I think it teaches us a very important lesson, that when people are offered the opportunity to participate from a place of respect, they will. But then when they are forced to do things because of laws and through the power of police, there is natural rejection of these ideas. And that's why I think that that's, in my view, one of the fundamental problems of Israel, that it turned the extremely resilient and healthy process of evolution of Jewish religion, it subjected it to legislation. And that's a big problem in Israel.
Yeah, Gosh, you make me wish that we had a month to talk about this. It's such an important subject and so relevant. We don't have a month. We don't have a few minutes. So I can't fully agree. I'll tell you why. While I'm utterly opposed to kfiyat datit, I don't believe in religious coercion. We're not the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. I would hate that kind of religion. I would despise that kind of religion that's shoved down your throat, let alone at gunpoint. My father's family, 2,500 years they lived in Iran. I'm disgusted by what's happened to that great country through this horrible revolution. No one wants to see religious coercion. On the other hand, there does have to be certain religious standards. So let me go to the example of California for a moment again, and then you can please respond. My wife became a naturalized citizen. Where was it? New Jersey. Let's say New Jersey has one standard that all you need to know is who the American president is, and you can become a citizen of the United States. You just need to know who's the president. Is it Trump? Is it Biden? But California, you need to know 50 presidents. Well, you know what's going to happen? Then citizens who are naturalized through New Jersey will not be granted access or citizenship in California. Then you will not have a United States of America. All 50 states will have different criteria for citizenship, and suddenly all 50 states will fragment, because the very definition of being an American is, if I want to, I can move to Florida right now. Nobody can stop me as an American. I can move to California, Iowa, Michigan. No one can stop me. I can't move to Australia right now, even though I'm married to an Australian. I have to do immigration stuff. I can't just move to, I don't know, to Bangladesh, because I'm not a citizen of those countries. So, Gidi, if we don't have one criteria for who is a Jew, if there isn't a single standard that we all agree on, that my fear is, then my children are not going to marry someone else's children, because they will question, are those kids converted properly according to a universally accepted standard, which right now is the halakha.
Yeah, but first of all, there's been, throughout the years, there's always been a debate about this standard. And the Orthodox definition of the standard has always been accepted by a minority of Jews, not by the majority of Jews. And I think that goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. And I think it's a healthy debate about who can convert into Judaism and who's a Jew, because the boundaries of our society should be flexible to a degree, and they should evolve over time. And I want to point to two very interesting points in history. During the days of the Roman oppression in the land of Israel, it was known, at least I have read, that the rabbis actually said that the benchmark, the bar for conversion, is lowered, which means if in a moment of such great oppression, someone wanted to join the Jewish people and be part of the trouble of being Jewish, they didn't check that much. But in times of prosperity, when people may want to join the Jewish people for the wrong reason, to marry into wealth or to marry into affluence or to marry into influence, then you have to check. And to me, it teaches us a different lesson. And that is than what you have mentioned. And that is that the fundamental idea of conversion, in my view, is that it's joining a people, joining a family. Part of my big issue with the current debate is that it views conversion as a religious process. And I think conversion should be a peoplehood process. Now, here's a very interesting point about that. In English, we say conversion. You can convert in and out. You convert into a religion and outside of religion. In Hebrew, we say giyur, which comes from the word ger, which comes from the word lagur, dwelling together. So the semantic field in Hebrew for joining the Jewish people is about being together. It's about peoplehood. You see it in the word that is being used. But in America, the relevant other to a Jew is a Christian and a Muslim. So the word that you use in America is conversion. But conversion is not giyur. These are fundamentally different concepts, I think. And to me, a lot of the essence of joining the Jewish people is lost. And Shmuley, you know that a lot of people go through the conversion. They keep Shabbat doing the conversion. They even lie to the rabbis. They get the conversion and they move on with their lives. But the question is, have they joined the Jewish people? Do they then now feel that they are part of the legacy and the destiny of the Jewish people? And that, to me, is the big question of conversions that is often lost in the debate.
Like I said, we could have a month discussing just this, and we should really return to this, Gidi, because it's such a relevant conversation. It's actually happening in Israel right now, but it's an evergreen for the Jewish people. Who is a Jew? How does one become a Jew? And is it a religious issue, or is it a peoplehood issue? I want to just turn for the last few minutes, and we'll end by 11:15. And I thank you for your patience with us tonight, Gidi, and so grateful for your time and your insights.
Thank you for having me. I'm having fun.
I love listening to you. Let me ask this last question. You know that Ron Dermer, Israel's immediate past ambassador to Washington, is a very dear friend of mine. He was my student president at Oxford. And he and I were once talking over dinner at length. And I said to him, I once really believed that the future of the Jewish people was going to be written in the diaspora, insofar as you mentioned, we've been in the diaspora longer than we've been in Israel. That how American Jewry influenced and impacted on American values, the American political system, American culture, how European Jews impacted on those things in Europe, all over the world, that how we interacted with Islam, how we interacted with evangelical Christianity, all of which takes place in the diaspora specifically, for the most part, rather than Israel. I once thought that kind of the future of our people was going to be written specifically in the diaspora, while Israel was going to focus on becoming this great nation, technology, religion, army, all the things that great nations do, no matter how small they are. Look at Singapore. Israel's become like the Singapore of the Middle East, and maybe more. But in that conversation with Ron, I said to him, Ron, it's not true anymore. The future of the Jewish people, I think, is being written in Israel specifically. Israel's achievements are just so extraordinary of late. They boggle the mind. I mean, the vaccine thing is just the latest example that Israel, out of the blue, out of the 190 odd countries in the world, would become the most advanced in terms of vaccination. And not everybody agrees with its vaccination program, but I'm not going to get into that controversy. But whether it's vaccination, whether it's technology, whether it's irrigation, whether it's agriculture, whether it's the military, whether it's finance, whether it's medicine, whether it's universities, whether it's this tiny country has not only exceeded expectations. And I'm not just saying this as if I were someone secular who is impressed that, secular achievement. Israel is not Singapore because Israel is a Jewish state. I'm saying it as someone who is amazed at how much, even as you said, Judaism, that the Jews as a light to the nation are flourishing. So I was debating with Ron, is the future of the Jewish people being written specifically by diaspora Jewry or in Israel? And I started saying, I think it's happening in Israel. But it comes to this question that I'd like you to comment on. If we are to be a light unto the nations, as the ancient prophets told us, or goyim netaticha, I've made you a light unto the nations, which is a verb, that you're supposed to spread this light. Can it be done in one place, one geographical location from Israel, and your light goes out to the whole world? Like, I don't know, the Vatican? Or do you need churches all over the world? The Vatican doesn't just spread Catholic light. It's got 2 billion churches in every place on earth. And it's specifically what you do locally that influences. In other words, the question again is, are we a light unto the nations by building the most extraordinary country in the Middle East? And people are amazed at it, and evangelical Christians believe they're blessed through it, and other nations believe they're blessed through it. And it's specifically by being there and your light spreads? Or is it specifically by being distributed, as it were, throughout the world? And you to use George H.W. Bush's expression, 1,000 points of light. You're not one giant flame in the Middle East spreading light, but you're 1,000 points of little pieces of light. What would you say?
So I think this is an amazing question. And with 5 minutes to go or 2 minutes to go, it's a challenge. But
take your time. This will be the last question, but take your time, please.
I'll say this. We are, and here I totally subscribe to the view of the late giant Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs that we lost this year. And I believe that the Jews have been leading the world from a place that he called a place of otherness. And you cannot be in a position of leadership in humanity if you're not other, if you're not different. And we are different in the sense that we have mechanisms in our society that generate an endless stream of societal innovation. So if there's permanent change in technology and in society, we have the internal mechanisms that will always produce new breakthrough ideas about how to respond to the evolution of humanity. And that's why Jews are in a permanent position of qualitative leadership in humanity. I'm not saying power. We don't control humanity. We don't have authority. But we are in a position of leadership in humanity that is permanent because of the Talmudic process that is embedded in our society. And Talmudic with a small t, right? But here is what's so interesting about the last, I would say, 20, 30 years, maybe 15 years. And that is that for the first time in our history, we can actually make a contribution to society that is not just qualitative through our ideas, but it's also quantitative. We can actually improve the lives of hundreds of millions of people. And that is a new phenomenon. And that is, I think, a new era in Jewish history. And that is happening because of the following combination. Of course, the power of technology, but also the state of Israel as an amazing playground for innovation around human problems. Connected to that is that there is a world wide web of Jewish communities that is probably the most powerful distribution system in the world. And it's not only a distribution system that pushes innovation out, it's also a system that brings the challenges and connects the challenges to Israel. And the last thing is that we have a critical mass of people, a lot of them are young people, who are committed to the idea of making the world a better place. And you can see them in Africa, in Latin America, across the United States, in Asia, all over the world. So that combination between Israel as this playground, the World Wide Web of Jewish communities, the power of technology, and the values of and the urge to be a light unto the nations, that is an explosive combination that created a new era in Jewish history. And I think it's an extremely exciting period to be a Jew in.
You know, that's a great way to end, because what you're essentially saying is that, I don't want to sound, I hate cliches, but this is going to sound like a cliche. You're essentially saying that both are absolutely essential. That it's so exciting to be Jewish today because of this orchestration of the ancient homeland rebirthed as a modern state, together with a flourishing diaspora, even as both face significant challenges. As you rightly said, Gidi, the ancient Jewish homeland faces existential, I think it faces an existential threat from Iran. I hear what you say about how even saying that can kind of undermine the whole premise of Zionism, that Israel is a refuge. And on the other hand, diaspora Jewry is faced with tremendous the challenges of assimilation and people writing themselves out of the Jewish community and out of Jewish identity and out of Jewish people just through assimilation, through not participating. And we're losing a lot of people just through that. And yes, Chabad and others are fighting that. And maybe that'll be our next conversation about how Israel can be leveraged to assist in the fight against assimilation. I know how we American Jews can leverage our powers and our efforts to help Israel, as we do politically, or AIPAC, or you're very involved in AIPAC. You're a renowned AIPAC speaker. I love AIPAC. I know what we can do for Israel, and we try our best, fight BDS, etc. But in terms of what Israel can do to give us, to strengthen the diaspora community in the fight against assimilation, that would be an interesting thing for us to discuss the next time. I know that you have very interesting views on that. But Gidi, let me just thank you.
Can I just say one thing?
Yes, please.
In this case, the army of Chabad is much more important than the army of Israel. And also, I want all of us to appreciate that for the first time in history, intermarriage is not necessarily assimilation. I'm quoting here Avram Infeld, who is one of my best friends and dear teachers. Because for the first time in history, when people marry out, they not necessarily want to leave the Jewish people and the Jewish religion. So every intermarried couple is actually a frontier for invitation and cooptation of that family into the Jewish people. So I know it's a sort of a counterintuitive view about this situation, and I'm definitely not encouraging intermarriage and assimilation, but I'm also saying that we have to appreciate the time that we're living in, where so many people are interested and attracted to what Judaism has to offer. And that is an opportunity.
But we need, right, and we need to do that so much more. That's always been my dream. Oh my God, we can go off to 10,000 tangents. See, Everyone, I'm speaking to you now, not to Gidi. When you speak to a really interesting person who has a very fertile mind, it becomes difficult to be an interviewer because the ideas are so rich and they're so expansive that it's hard to stay focused. I can speak to Gidi for the next millennium, okay? Until the Messiah comes, even though he's coming now. But until the millennium arrives, that's true, Gidi, about that intermarriage does provide an opportunity to bring people into our community, of course, but based on conversion and based on, of course, practice, because the real question is whether Jews who marry outside the community will continue to practice their faith and raise children in the faith. But I agree that's something that definitely should be addressed, as should perhaps outreach to Jews who have a Jewish bloodline, even if it's not necessarily matrilineal. They may not be halachic Jews, but you can't say that they have no Jewish connection.
Of course.
I'd love to. We could do DNA tests and find out who has some kind of Jewish bloodline, and maybe invite them to know more about the Jewish people. And then there's also converting the whole world, not to the Jewish religion. We've never been a proselytizing faith, but converting the world to a belief in universal Jewish values. And Jewish values have shaped, like what you just said about the influence that we have. It should be a values influence. It should be. It should be our incredible values. That's why we created the World Values Network, to try to spread those Jewish values. And you've helped us tonight in discussing this. I hope that we can come back and discuss even more. Gidi, how can people find your writings and find you online, please?
So first of all, thank you for this question. And I think the World Values Network, that work is extremely important, because I believe that Jewish values are an extremely powerful platform for connecting with non-Jewish communities around the world and other religions, because what is so special, I believe, it's not special, it's not unique, but what is true, always true about Jewish values is that they come from a fundamental appreciation, humanistic appreciation. Ki b'tzelem Elohim. And that is, I think, the cornerstone of all Jewish philosophy and all Jewish thought that I'm aware of. So I actually think I find your work to be inspiring and very important. About my work, I wrote a book called Flexigidity, which is a portmanteau word between flexibility and rigidity. The byline is The Secret of Jewish Adaptability. You can find that book online on Amazon. And obviously, if you Google my name, Gidi Grinstein, or you look at my work at the Reut Institute, which is the think tank that I founded, I'm also involved in a project called TOM, Tikkun Olam Makers, which is basically a platform for inventions and innovations around needs of people at the bottom of the economic ladder, people with disabilities, elderly or poor. We believe that Israel and Jews around the world can partner together to make a significant and distinctly Jewish and Israeli contribution to humanity at an unprecedented scale that I explained earlier. Our goal is to help 250 million people within a decade. I know it's a moonshot goal, but we're going for it.
That's extraordinary. Well, you know what? I think what makes you so unique, Gidi, is how large your vision is, how big you think. Nothing starts without giant dreams. We're going to continue this conversation, God willing. By the way, anyone who would like to join our minyan, especially in the last month that I'm saying Kaddish for my father, and I thank Gidi for speaking about that, and I thank him so much for his participation. Just write to us at info@shmuley.com if you live in the New York metropolitan area, if you live in North Jersey, if you live in Manhattan, any part of Manhattan. We do this minyanim regularly. There's a lot of people who are actually saying Kaddish for deceased parents, parents who've been lost during the coronavirus, and we're all kind of steeped in tragedy right now, and we all kind of need each other. And I echo Gidi's words about us being a community and being a family and being a faith which expresses itself through specifically community and family. So Gidi, God bless you. And
thank you very much for having me.
The Reut Institute does. Flexigidity is a brilliant book. Like you, it reflects your genius, and people are going to love reading it, and they can find it on Amazon. And everybody, Shabbat Shalom. Look forward. I hope that you'll all watch my Parshat HaShavua class tomorrow, where I talk about the Parshat Vayikra, all about the korbanot, the sacrifices. I know the word sacrifice is not that sexy in the year 2021. Indulgence is maybe a more apt word, but we're going to change that tomorrow. God bless you all.